The dust from the departing stagecoach still hung in the air when Hannah Thorne hit the wooden sidewalk outside the Wells Fargo office, her body crumpling like a marionette with severed strings. The handful of people waiting to board the afternoon stage to tucks and froze, their luggage forgotten at their feet, as the young woman's carpetbag spilled open beside her unconscious form, scattering delicate embroidered handkerchiefs and a worn leather-bound Bible across the sun-bleached planks. Mason Parker had been leading his bay mare toward the livery stable when he heard the collective gasp from the crowd. His boots hit the ground in long strides as he crossed Allen Street, shouldering past a portly merchant and dropping to one knee beside the fallen woman. Her face was flushed crimson despite the paleness of her lips, and when he pressed the back of his hand to her forehead, the heat radiating from her skin made him curse under his breath. "Somebody get Doc Whitfield," Mason called out, but the stage driver was already shaking his head. "Doc's over in Bisbee tending to them miners that got caught in the cave-in. Won't be back till tomorrow at the earliest." "Then get Doc Morrison," Mason said, slipping one arm beneath the woman's shoulders and the other under her knees. She weighed hardly anything, he noticed, and up close he could see the hollows beneath her cheekbones, the way her traveling dress hung loose on her frame. "Morrison's passed out drunk at the Oriental Saloon, same as every afternoon," someone called from the growing crowd of onlookers. Mason straightened with the unconscious woman cradled against his chest, his jaw tightening. "Fine. Somebody ride out to my place in an hour and let me know if either of those doctors sobers up or gets back to town." He looked down at the scattered belongings. "And bring her bag." A middle-aged woman in a calico dress stepped forward, gathering the items quickly. "I will bring it myself, Mr. Parker. The poor dear looks half-starved." Mason nodded his thanks and started walking, his long legs carrying them down the street toward the edge of town, where his small ranch sat nestled against the rocky foothills. The October sun beat down mercilessly despite the lateness of the season, and he could feel sweat gathering between his shoulder blades beneath his cotton shirt. The woman in his arms stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering, and he caught a glimpse of gray-blue eyes before they closed again. "Hang on," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. "Just hang on." His ranch house was modest but well-maintained, a testament to the 3 years of hard work he had put into building something of his own after leaving his father's cattle operation in Texas. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one, with 2 bedrooms branching off to the side. Mason kicked the door open and carried his unexpected guest straight to his bedroom, the only one with a proper bed frame and mattress rather than just a cot. He laid her down as gently as he could, then moved quickly to open the window and create a cross breeze. The woman's breathing was shallow and rapid, her chest rising and falling beneath the high collar of her dress. Mason hesitated, propriety warring with practicality, before he began unbuttoning the top buttons of her dress and loosening the collar. His fingers encountered the rigid resistance of a tightly laced corset beneath, and he shook his head in frustration. "Damn fool contraption," he muttered, reaching for the pins holding her dark hair in its elaborate updo. If she was suffering from heat exhaustion, the last thing she needed was to be trussed up like a Christmas turkey. He managed to loosen her hair without causing too much disarray, then fetched a basin of cool water and several clean cloths from the kitchen. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he dampened a cloth and began carefully wiping her face and neck, trying to bring down the fever that raged through her system. Her features were delicate, he noticed, with a small nose and a scattering of freckles across her cheeks that spoke of time spent in the sun despite the fashionable paleness her social class would have demanded. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Mason changed the cloths repeatedly, keeping them cool against her burning skin. He had seen men laid low by the desert heat before, watched strong cowboys reduced to babbling wrecks or worse. The key was getting their temperature down before the fever cooked their brains. When the woman's eyes finally opened again, they were unfocused and glassy. "Mother," she whispered, her voice cracked and dry. "No, madam," Mason said quietly, lifting her head slightly and bringing a cup of water to her lips. "Drink this, just a little at a time." She managed a few sips before turning her head away, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Where?" "Tombstone, Arizona. You collapsed outside the stage office. I am Mason Parker. You are safe." Her eyes drifted closed again, and Mason resumed his vigil, continuing to cool her skin with the damp cloths. He had just refilled the basin for the third time when he heard boots on the front porch, followed by a sharp knock. The woman in calico stood there holding the carpet bag, her face creased with concern. "How is she? Burning up with fever? Has she been traveling alone?" "Must have been. Nobody claimed to know her." The woman stepped inside, setting the bag on the table. "I am Martha Henderson. My husband runs the mercantile. That Dr. Morrison, he is in no state to treat anyone, but I sent my boy to Bisbee to see if he can hurry Doc Whitfield along." "I appreciate that, Mrs. Henderson." Martha moved past him toward the bedroom, and Mason followed. She took one look at the woman on the bed and clicked her tongue. "Lord have mercy, that corset needs to come off. The girl cannot breathe properly. You wait outside, Mr. Parker, and I will get her into something more suitable." Mason retreated gratefully, pacing the main room while Martha worked. Through the open bedroom door, he could hear the older woman's soft voice, talking to her unconscious patient as she undressed and redressed her. When Martha finally emerged, she was carrying the travel-stained dress and multiple layers of undergarments. "I found a nightgown in her bag. She is wearing that now, much more comfortable. Poor thing is thin as a rail." Martha's expression was troubled. "There is a letter in her bag addressed to a Reverend Thomas in Tucson. Seems she was on her way there to take up a position as a schoolteacher. She never made it onto the stage." "No, she did not." Martha handed him a small envelope. This was in her bag too, her tickets and papers. "Her name is Hannah Thorne, from Philadelphia." Mason took the envelope, studying the careful script on the outside. Philadelphia was a long way from the Arizona territory, and he wondered what had driven a genteel Eastern woman to seek employment in the rough and tumble towns of the Southwest. "I will stay with her for a while," Martha offered. "You look like you could use some air." Mason nodded and stepped out onto the porch, filling his lungs with the hot desert breeze. The sun was beginning its descent toward the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. His mare still stood patiently where he had ground tied her near the water trough, and he moved to unsaddle her and get her settled in the small barn behind the house. The familiar routine of caring for his horse helped settle his thoughts. He had not planned on playing nursemaid to a stranger, but he could hardly have left her lying in the street. Tombstone was not the lawless chaos it had been in the early '80s, but it was still no place for a sick woman with no one to look after her. By the time he returned to the house, Martha had set a pot of broth on the stove to warm. "She woke again briefly," the older woman reported. "Drank a bit more water. The fever is still high, but I have seen worse. She just needs rest and proper care. I can manage that." Martha gave him a knowing look. "People will talk, you know, a single man and an unmarried woman under the same roof. Let them talk. I am not going to throw her out to satisfy the gossips." "Good man." Martha patted his arm. "I will check back tomorrow." "If the fever has not broken by then, We might need to get creative about finding a doctor." After Martha left, Mason returned to the bedroom to check on his patient. Hannah was sleeping more peacefully now, her breathing deeper and more regular. The harsh flush had faded from her cheeks, though when he touched her forehead, she was still far too warm. He pulled a chair close to the bed and settled in, prepared for a long night. The hours passed slowly. Mason dozed fitfully, waking every time Hannah stirred or made a sound. Twice more he roused her enough to get her to drink water, and once he managed to get a few spoonfuls of warm broth into her. Each time, her eyes would open briefly, confusion and fear flickering across her face before exhaustion pulled her back under. It was near dawn when the fever finally broke. Mason had been half asleep in his chair when he noticed that Hannah's restless tossing had ceased. He reached out to touch her forehead and felt cool skin instead of the burning heat that had radiated from her all night. Relief washed through him, so intense it left him momentarily light-headed. Hannah's eyes opened, clearer now than they had been. She looked at him for a long moment, taking in his stubbled jaw and rumpled clothes. The worry lines creased into his forehead. "You are real," she said softly. "Last time I checked." Mason managed a tired smile. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle." She started to sit up, then seemed to realize she was wearing only a nightgown in a strange man's bed. Color flooded her cheeks, and she pulled the quilt up to her chin. "What happened? Where am I?" Mason explained everything as gently as he could, watching the play of emotions across her face. Embarrassment gave way to distress, then to a weary resignation that seemed far too old for her features. "I am so sorry to have imposed on you this way, Mr. Parker. I do not know what came over me. I was feeling poorly on the stage from Benson, but I thought if I could just get to Tucson, I would be fine." "When was the last time you ate a proper meal?" Hannah's gaze dropped to the quilt. "I had bread and cheese 3 days ago in Lordsburg." 3 days, Mason stood abruptly. "Stay there." "I am making breakfast." He left before she could protest, stoking the fire in the stove and pulling out eggs, bacon, and the last of Martha's bread from the basket she had brought by the previous week. The familiar motions of cooking helped settle the anger that had sparked in his chest. What kind of situation would drive a woman to go 3 days without eating? By the time he returned to the bedroom with a loaded tray, Hannah had managed to sit up against the pillows, though she looked pale and shaky. Mason set the tray across her lap, noting the way her eyes widened at the sight of the food. "I cannot possibly eat all this." "Then eat what you can." He watched as she picked up a fork with trembling fingers and took a small bite of eggs, then another. Her careful, ladylike pace gradually increased as hunger overcame propriety, and Mason felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. Whatever else was wrong, at least she had an appetite. "There is water in the pitcher and coffee if you want it," he said, gesturing to the bedside table. "I will be just outside if you need anything. There is a chamber pot under the bed, and I will see about getting Martha back here to help you with anything else you might need. Mr. Parker." Hannah's voice stopped him at the door. "Thank you for everything. I truly do not know what would have become of me if you had not helped." "You would have gotten help from someone," Mason said, though they both knew that was not necessarily true. Tombstone had plenty of good people, but it also had its share of those who would have seen a vulnerable woman as an opportunity, rather than someone in need of assistance. He left her to eat in privacy and went outside to do his morning chores. The sun was fully up now, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and rust. His small herd of cattle were scattered across the scrubland, and he could hear the chickens clucking in their coop behind the barn. The normal rhythms of ranch life helped center him after the strangeness of the past 12 hours. When he came back inside an hour later, Hannah was asleep again. the empty breakfast tray on the bedside table. Mason carried it quietly to the kitchen, then settled at the table with his own plate of eggs and bacon. He needed to figure out what to do next. Hannah was clearly in no condition to continue her journey to Tucson, but she also could not stay here indefinitely without causing a scandal that would damage both their reputations. The sound of an approaching wagon interrupted his thoughts. Through the window, he saw Martha Henderson climbing down, accompanied by a thin, gray-haired man carrying a medical bag. Doc Whitfield had made it back from Bisbee. "Morning, Mason," the doctor said as he stepped onto the porch. "Martha tells me you have a patient for me." "Yes, sir." "She collapsed yesterday from what I figure was heat exhaustion and not eating properly. Fever broke just before dawn." Doc Whitfield nodded, his weathered face serious. "Let me take a look at her." Mason led him to the bedroom, where Hannah stirred at the sound of voices. Her eyes went wide at the sight of the strange man, and Mason quickly made introductions. "This is Doc Whitfield, Miss Thorne. He is going to examine you and make sure you are on the mend." "I am fine, really," Hannah protested weakly, but the doctor was already setting down his bag and pulling out his stethoscope. "Let me be the judge of that, young lady. Mr. Parker, if you would give us some privacy." Mason retreated to the main room where Martha was waiting, a basket of fresh bread and a covered pot in her arms. "I figured you could use some provisions," she said, bustling toward the stove, "and some proper meals to help that girl get her strength back. You are a saint, Martha Henderson." "Nonsense. I am just doing what any Christian woman would do." She began unpacking her basket, setting out not just bread but also preserves, fresh vegetables, and a jar of rich beef stew. "The whole town is talking about it, you know. Mason Parker rescuing the mysterious Eastern lady. I just did what needed doing. I know that, and anyone with sense knows that, but you best prepare yourself for some attention." Martha gave him a shrewd look. "She is a pretty thing, that Miss Thorne, and you are a good man who has been alone too long." "Martha." "I am just saying what everyone else is thinking." She smiled at his discomfort. "How old are you now, Mason? 26, 27? 27, he admitted reluctantly. "And Miss Thorne cannot be more than 23 or 24. You are both of age, both unmarried. People are going to draw conclusions." Mason was saved from having to respond by Doc Whitfield emerging from the bedroom. The doctor's expression was grave as he closed the door quietly behind him. "Well?" Mason asked. "The girl is malnourished and exhausted, but she will recover with proper rest and regular meals. What concerns me more is what she told me about her circumstances." Doc Whitfield accepted the cup of coffee Martha poured for him, wrapping his gnarled hands around the warm ceramic. "Her father died 6 months ago, leaving nothing but debts. She sold everything to pay what she could, then used the last of her money for the journey west. She has exactly $12 to her name and a letter from a reverend in Tucson promising her a teaching position that pays $15 a month." $12, Martha breathed. "Lord have mercy." "She needs at least a week of bed rest and good food before she will be strong enough to travel," Doc Whitfield continued. "But she is insisting she has to get on the next stage to Tucson or risk losing the position." Mason set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. "She is not getting on any stage until you say she is fit to travel. I told her as much, but she is a stubborn one." The doctor's eyes twinkled slightly. "Reminds me of you, actually. I will talk to her, see that you do. In the meantime, she needs rest, regular meals, and no stress." Doc Whitfield stood, collecting his bag. "I will check back in a few days, send word if her condition worsens." After the doctor and Martha left, Mason stood on the porch for a long moment, staring out at the horizon. A week. He could manage a week. It was not like he had a choice anyway. His conscience would not let him put a sick woman on a stagecoach, regardless of what opportunities she might miss. He found Hannah trying to get out of bed when he returned to the bedroom, her face pale with effort. "Whoa, hold on. Where do you think you are going?" "I need to get my things together. The stage to Tucson leaves at 2 o'clock and I must be on it." "Like hell you will." Mason crossed the room in 3 strides, gently but firmly guiding her back down onto the mattress. "Doc Whitfield said you need a week of rest." "I do not have a week. If I miss this position, I will have nothing. No prospects, no money, no way to support myself." Hannah's voice cracked and she turned her face away, but not before Mason saw the gleam of tears in her eyes. He sat down on the edge of the bed, keeping his voice gentle. "Missing one stage is not going to cost you the job. I will pay to send a telegram to Reverend Thomas explaining the situation. Any reasonable person will understand." "You do not know that. You do not understand." A tear escaped, tracking down her pale cheek. "I have already lost everything else. I cannot lose this too." Something in Mason's chest twisted at the raw despair in her voice. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand, her fingers cold and fragile in his calloused palm. "You are not going to lose anything, but you are also not going to kill yourself trying to get there. What good is a teaching position if you collapse again and do not wake up this time?" Hannah's shoulders shook with silent sobs, and Mason found himself moving closer, offering the only comfort he could by being present. He had never been good with crying women. His mother had died when he was 12, and he had spent the years since surrounded mostly by men, by cowboys and ranchers who solved their problems with hard work and harder drinking. But something about Hannah's grief felt different, more profound than simple tears over a difficult situation. "I am sorry," she finally managed, wiping at her eyes with her free hand. "You have been nothing but kind, and here I am falling apart in your bed like some sort of hysterical child." "You are not hysterical, and you are definitely not a child. You are scared and exhausted, which is perfectly reasonable given the circumstances." Mason squeezed her hand gently. "Let me help. Stay here for the week, eat Martha's cooking, and get your strength back. I will send that telegram, and when Doc Whitfield clears you for travel, I will personally escort you to Tucson and make sure you get to Reverend Thomas safely." "I cannot ask you to do that." "You are not asking. I am offering." He met her eyes, seeing the uncertainty and hope warring in their gray-blue depths. "Please, Hannah, let someone help you for once." The use of her first name seemed to settle something between them. Hannah nodded slowly, fresh tears spilling over. "Okay, thank you, Mason." He left her to rest and headed into town to send the telegram, composing the message carefully to explain the medical emergency without causing undue alarm. The young clerk at the telegraph office gave him a curious look, but accepted the coins and promised the message would go out within the hour. On his way back through town, Mason stopped at the general store to pick up supplies. He was not much of a cook beyond basic trail food, but he figured he could manage to heat up the meals Martha brought and maybe put together some simple things to supplement them. The store owner, Frank Henderson, rang up his purchases with a knowing smile. "Heard you have a house guest, Mason. News travels fast. Always does in Tombstone. Martha says the young lady is doing better. She will be fine with some rest." Mason counted out coins for the supplies, then added, "I appreciate your wife's help. Martha lives for this sort of thing, gives her a chance to mother everyone in town." Frank's expression grew more serious. "You are a good man for taking her in, Mason. Not everyone would have done it. Anyone would have done the same. You keep telling yourself that." The ride back to the ranch gave Mason time to think about the week ahead. Having Hannah under his roof was going to complicate things, no question about it, but the alternative was unthinkable. He had seen too many people, especially women, destroyed by circumstances beyond their control in this harsh territory. If he could prevent that from happening to one person, he would. He found Hannah awake when he returned, sitting up against the pillows and reading from the worn Bible he had seen spill from her bag. She looked up as he entered, and something in her expression had softened from the earlier desperation. "The telegram has been sent," he reported, setting down the supplies. "I explained that you had taken ill and would arrive as soon as the doctor cleared you for travel." "Thank you." Hannah closed the Bible, running her fingers over the cracked leather cover. "This was my mother's. She died when I was 16. Sometimes reading her favorite passages makes me feel close to her again." Mason understood that better than she knew. "My mother died when I was 12. Fever took her in less than 3 days. I am sorry. It was a long time ago." He gestured toward the kitchen. "Are you hungry? I can heat up some of that stew Martha brought. I do not want to be a burden. If you were a burden, I would not have offered." Mason headed for the stove, speaking over his shoulder. "Besides, I have to eat too. Might as well heat enough for 2. He heard Hannah's soft laugh, and it did something strange to his chest, made the house feel less empty than it had in the 3 years he had lived there alone. Mason pushed the thought aside and focused on the practical task of preparing food, but he could not quite shake the feeling that something had shifted in his carefully ordered life. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Mason would rise at dawn to handle the ranch work, then return to prepare breakfast for both of them. Hannah insisted on eating at the table rather than in bed after the second day, and though she was still weak and tired easily, the color had begun to return to her cheeks. They fell into easy conversation during meals, sharing stories of their vastly different upbringings. Hannah spoke of Philadelphia, of cobblestone streets and gas lamps, of libraries and concert halls and all the cultural refinements that seemed impossibly distant from the dusty reality of the Arizona territory. Her father had been a banker, respected and prosperous, until bad investments and worse luck had destroyed everything. She described the horror of watching their possessions sold at auction, the shame of accepting charity from former friends who looked at her with pity. Mason, in turn, told her about growing up on his father's ranch in Texas, learning to rope and ride before he could properly read. He spoke of the endless work, the constant danger from weather and animals, and the occasional rustler or raider. He explained his decision to strike out on his own, to build something that was his rather than simply inheriting what his father and grandfather had built before him. "You regret it?" Hannah asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible shades of crimson and gold. She was wrapped in a shawl against the cooling air, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. "Leaving Texas? No, it was the right choice for me." Mason leaned back in his chair, stretching out his long legs. "My older brother will inherit the ranch, and that is as it should be. He loves that land in a way I never could. This place, though, this is mine. Every fence post, every head of cattle, every rocky acre. I built it with my own hands and sweat. That must be a good feeling." "It is." He glanced at her, noting the wistful expression on her face. "What about you? Any regrets about heading west?" Hannah was quiet for a long moment. "I regret that circumstances forced me to leave. But if I am honest, Philadelphia had stopped feeling like home long before my father died. After my mother passed, something changed. Or maybe I changed. I used to love the social gatherings, the parties and dances, but it all started to feel so hollow, so pointless. Everyone performing their roles, saying what they were expected to say, doing what they were expected to do. And you wanted something different. I wanted something real. She pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders. Is that foolish? To throw away everything familiar in search of something I cannot even properly define. Not foolish. Brave. Hannah turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the dying light. I do not feel brave. I feel terrified most of the time. That is what makes it brave. Doing it anyway, despite the fear. Mason held her gaze, and something passed between them, a moment of understanding that went deeper than words. Martha Henderson continued to visit daily, bringing food and supplies and her own brand of cheerful practicality. On the fourth day of Hannah's recovery, she arrived with a bundle of fabric and a determined expression. You cannot keep wearing that nightgown, Martha announced, setting the bundle on the table. I brought some material and a pattern. We are going to make you a proper day dress suitable for the territory. Oh, I could not possibly accept more charity, Hannah protested, but Martha waved her objections away. It is not charity, it is common sense. That fancy traveling dress of yours is not practical for the heat out here, and you will need something suitable for teaching in once you get to Tucson. She began spreading out the fabric, a sturdy cotton in a soft blue that matched Hannah's eyes. Besides, you can sew, cannot you? Yes, but then you will help. We will have this done in 2 days if we work together. Mason wisely retreated to the barn while the women took over his main room, the sound of their voices and occasional laughter drifting through the open windows. He found himself smiling as he mucked out stalls and repaired tack, enjoying the evidence of life and activity in his usually quiet home. That evening, he returned to find Hannah still bent over the sewing, her face tight with concentration as she worked tiny, precise stitches into the dress bodice. She looked up at his approach, blinking as though coming back from a great distance. Martha had to leave to make dinner for Frank, but she said we made excellent progress. You should rest your eyes, Mason said, noting the faint shadows beneath them. There is no rush. I enjoy it, actually. It feels good to be doing something useful. Hannah set down the sewing with obvious reluctance. I have felt so helpless these past months, watching everything fall apart and being unable to stop it. At least with sewing, I can see the results of my efforts. Mason understood that need for control, for tangible proof that your actions mattered. Come outside for a bit. The evening air will do you good. They had fallen into the habit of sitting on the porch together as the day cooled, and Mason found himself looking forward to these quiet conversations more than he wanted to examine too closely. Hannah was easy to talk to, quick-witted and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh more than he had in years. Tell me about your ranch, Hannah said as they settled into the chairs. Your plans for it. Well, right now I have about 50 head of cattle, but I am hoping to build that up to 200 in the next few years. The land can support it if we get decent rain. Mason gestured toward the darkening landscape. I want to expand the house too, eventually. Add a proper parlor and maybe another bedroom or two. Make it a real home, not just a place to sleep between work. It already feels like a home, Hannah said softly. You have made it welcoming. That is mostly your presence, I think. It has been just me for so long, the place probably started to feel like a bachelor's quarters. Hannah laughed. It is tidy enough for a bachelor's quarters. No mysterious stains or piles of dirty clothes. I will have you know I am very particular about cleanliness. Too many years of my mother swatting me with a dish towel if I tracked mud inside. The memory made him smile despite the ache that always accompanied thoughts of his mother. She sounds like she was wonderful. She was. Strong, patient, kind. She could outwork any of the ranch hands but still make time to read me stories before bed. Mason paused, surprised by how much he was sharing. He rarely talked about his mother, found it easier to keep those memories locked away where they could not hurt. You remind me of her sometimes. That same quiet strength. I do not feel strong. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is just getting up every morning and doing what needs to be done, even when everything in you wants to give up. He looked at her directly. You have had every reason to give up these past months, but you did not. You kept moving forward, kept fighting. That is strength, Hannah. She met his eyes, and in the fading light he could see the shimmer of tears. Thank you for seeing me that way. Most people just see a burden, a problem to be solved or avoided. Then most people are fools. The words hung between them, weighted with a meaning that went beyond simple reassurance. Mason felt his heart beating faster, an awareness of Hannah that had been building over the past days suddenly crystallizing into something undeniable. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was fascinating. Every conversation revealed new depths, new facets of her personality that drew him in. Hannah broke the moment by standing, wrapping her shawl more tightly around herself. I should go to bed. Martha wants to finish the dress tomorrow, and I need to be useful. Good night, Hannah. Good night, Mason. He stayed on the porch long after she had gone inside, staring up at the emerging stars and trying to sort through the tangle of feelings in his chest. He had not expected this, had not planned on caring about the woman he had rescued. But somewhere between that first moment of lifting her unconscious form, and now, everything had changed. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. Mason was working with one of his horses in the corral when he spotted a rider approaching, the figure resolving into Sheriff John Behan as he drew closer. Mason's jaw tightened slightly. He and Behan had never been particularly friendly, their personalities too different to mesh well. Parker, Behan said by way of greeting, not bothering to dismount. Heard you have been harboring a woman out here. Helping someone who needed medical assistance, Mason corrected, his tone cool. Is there a problem, Sheriff? That depends. What are your intentions toward Miss Thorne? My intentions are to make sure she recovers her health and gets safely to her teaching position in Tucson. Beyond that, I do not see how it is any of your business. Behan's expression soured. It is my business when there are complaints about impropriety. A single man and woman living together without proper supervision. Miss Thorne is chaperoned daily by Martha Henderson, and she is under doctor's orders for bed rest. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with Doc Whitfield. Mason kept his hands relaxed, but his eyes were hard. Or they can come talk to me directly. Just doing my job, Parker, making sure everything is above board. It is. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do. Behan lingered a moment longer, as if considering whether to push the issue, then wheeled his horse around and rode back toward town. Mason watched him go, anger simmering in his gut. The last thing Hannah needed was to be the subject of gossip and scandal. He found her in the main room with Martha, both women looking concerned. We heard voices, Martha said. Was that the sheriff? Just checking in. Mason tried to keep his tone light, but Hannah's expression suggested she was not fooled. This is my fault. I have damaged your reputation by staying here. She stood, wringing her hands. Maybe I should try to find somewhere else to stay, a boarding house, or you are not going anywhere, Mason interrupted. And my reputation can handle some gossip. Yours is what I am worried about. Perhaps, Martha said carefully, it would help if Miss Thorne had a more visible female companion. Not that I doubt your character, Mason, but appearances matter. What do you suggest? Let me talk to some of the church ladies. Maybe we can arrange for someone to stay here as a proper chaperone, at least until Miss Thorne is ready to travel. It was a reasonable solution, but Mason found himself resenting the need for it. The past days with Hannah had felt natural and easy, free from the constraints of society's expectations. Adding another person to the household would change that dynamic entirely. But he could see the worry in Hannah's face, the fear that she had caused problems for him, and he nodded. "If you think it would help, Martha, I would appreciate it. I will see what I can arrange." Martha gathered her things. "In the meantime, keep your head high, both of you. You have done nothing wrong." After Martha left, Hannah sank back into her chair, her fingers plucking at the sewing in her lap. "I am so sorry, Mason. I never meant to cause trouble for you." "You have not caused any trouble that I cannot handle." He crossed the room to sit across from her. "Hannah, look at me." She raised her eyes, and he saw the guilt and shame written clearly in her expression. "None of this is your fault," he said firmly. "You got sick. I helped. That is all there is to it, and anyone who wants to make it into something sordid can answer to me." "But the sheriff can go to hell." Mason caught himself softening his tone. "I am sorry. I should not speak that way in front of you, but I mean it. I do not give a damn what Behin or anyone else thinks about the situation. What matters is that you get well and get to Tucson safely. Everything else is just noise." Hannah studied his face for a long moment, and he forced himself to meet her gaze steadily, to let her see the sincerity in his words. Finally, she nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Thank you for everything. I do not know how I will ever repay your kindness. I do not want repayment. I just want you to be okay." The words came out more intense than he had intended, and he saw Hannah's eyes widen slightly, a flush rising in her cheeks. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an awareness that had been growing steadily over the past days. Mason stood abruptly, needing distance before he did something foolish like reach for her hand or say something he could not take back. "I should check on the cattle." "Will you be all right here for a while?" "Of course." "Go. I have sewing to keep me occupied." He escaped to the familiar routine of ranch work, but his thoughts kept circling back to Hannah. To the way her eyes lit up when she laughed, the quiet grace with which she moved through his home, the strength and vulnerability she showed in equal measure. He was falling for her, he realized, had probably been falling since the moment he lifted her unconscious form from the wooden sidewalk. The realization should have terrified him. He had worked hard to build a life of independence, free from the complications of emotional entanglements. But instead of fear, he felt something closer to exhilaration, a sense of rightness that he could not explain or deny. The next morning brought Martha and another woman, a stern-faced widow named Abigail Cooper, who Martha introduced as Hannah's new chaperone. Abigail moved into Mason's room while he relocated to the cot in the small spare room, and her presence immediately changed the atmosphere of the house. Where Mason and Hannah had fallen into easy, comfortable companionship, Abigail inserted herself as a constant third presence. She monitored their conversations with hawk-like attention, cleared her throat pointedly whenever Mason and Hannah's eyes met for too long, and generally made it clear that she took her role as guardian of propriety very seriously. Mason found it stifling. Hannah, he could tell, found it mortifying. But they endured it with as much grace as they could muster, understanding that appearances mattered, especially for Hannah's future prospects. Doc Whitfield returned on the 6th day to examine Hannah. Mason paced outside while the doctor worked, trying not to let his anxiety show. He heard the murmur of voices, then the door opened and Doc Whitfield emerged, his expression pleased. "She has made excellent progress. Another day or two of good food and rest, and she will be fit for travel." Relief and disappointment warred in Mason's chest. "That is good news." "You have done well by her, Mason. Not many men would have taken such good care of a stranger." Doc Whitfield clapped him on the shoulder. "I will check back tomorrow to give her a final clearance." That evening, Mason and Hannah managed to steal a few minutes alone on the porch while Abigail was occupied with preparing dinner. The sun was setting in its usual spectacular display, and Hannah stood at the railing, her face tilted toward the light. "I am going to miss this," she said softly. "The sunsets here are like nothing I have ever seen." "They are something special," Mason agreed, moving to stand beside her, not touching but close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "What else will you miss?" Hannah turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw the reflection of his own feelings. "This. Talking with you, the peace of this place, the feeling of being somewhere I could belong. You could stay." The words escaped before Mason could stop them, and he saw Hannah's sharp intake of breath. "What? Stay? Here, in Tombstone?" He turned to face her fully, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I know it is not what you planned. I know you have the teaching position waiting in Tucson. But Hannah, these past days with you have been the best I can remember in years. I wake up looking forward to breakfast conversations. I find excuses to come back to the house just to see you smile. And I know it is crazy, I know we have only known each other a week, but Mason." Hannah's hand found his, her fingers trembling. "I feel it too, this connection between us. I have never experienced anything like it. Then stay, or let me come with you to Tucson. I do not care where we are as long as we are together. You would leave your ranch, everything you have built. I would leave anything for you." The truth of it settled over Mason like a revelation. "Hannah, I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since the moment I first saw you. I do not understand it, cannot explain it, but I know it is real." Tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks, and she squeezed his hand tightly. "I love you too. God help me, I do." "But Mason, we have known each other for less than a week. What if this is just gratitude on my part? What if you are confusing compassion for something deeper? Is that what you feel? Gratitude and nothing more?" "No." The word was barely a whisper. "I feel like I have been waiting my whole life to meet you. Like everything that came before was just preparation for this moment." Mason pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Then what are we arguing about? Practicality? Reason? All the sensible things people are supposed to consider before making life-changing decisions." But even as she spoke, Hannah was leaning into his touch, her eyes locked on his. To hell with practicality. Mason closed the distance between them, his lips finding hers in a kiss that sent shockwaves through his entire body. Hannah made a small sound of surprise that quickly melted into something else, and her arms came up around his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss was everything Mason had imagined, and nothing he could have prepared for. Sweet and desperate and full of promise, it spoke of all the things words could not capture. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hannah's eyes were shining with tears and joy in equal measure. "Marry me," Mason said, the words tumbling out without thought or planning. "I know it is fast. I know people will say we are crazy, but Hannah, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Marry me." "Yes." Hannah laughed through her tears. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They kissed again, and this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Just two people who had found in each other something rare and precious and worth fighting for. The sound of Abigail clearing her throat from the doorway broke them apart. The older woman stood there with her arms crossed, her expression caught between disapproval and something that might have been reluctant approval. "I assume this means there will be a wedding?" she asked tartly. "As soon as possible," Mason confirmed, keeping Hannah tucked against his side. "Well then, I suppose my services as chaperone will no longer be needed once you are properly married." Abigail's stern face softened slightly. "You will need to speak to Reverend Phillips about the arrangements, and Miss Thorne will need a proper wedding dress." The next hours passed in a blur of activity and excitement. Martha arrived with Frank in tow, summoned by Abigail's breathless announcement, and the small house erupted into planning and celebration. Doc Whitfield, making his evening check-in, declared Hannah fit for travel, but suggested she might want to delay her journey to Tucson for a wedding instead. "I will send a telegram to Reverend Thomas explaining the situation," the doctor said with a knowing smile. "I suspect he will understand that marriage takes precedence over teaching positions." Mason sent his own telegram to his father and brother in Texas, sharing the news and inviting them to the wedding if they could make the journey in time. He doubted they would manage it given the short notice, but he wanted them to know. Reverend Phillips agreed to perform the ceremony in 3 days' time, allowing enough preparation for a modest celebration while still moving quickly enough to satisfy the demands of propriety. Martha took charge of organizing the women of the church to help with preparations, and suddenly Mason's quiet ranch was the center of a whirlwind of activity. Through it all, Mason kept finding excuses to be near Hannah, to touch her hand or share a smile across the chaos. The reality of what they were doing had not quite sunk in yet, but every time he looked at her, every time their eyes met, he felt the absolute rightness of his decision. On the evening before the wedding, Hannah walked out to find Mason in the barn, where he was grooming his mare with more attention than the task required. She leaned against the stall door, watching him work, having second thoughts. She asked lightly, though he could hear the genuine question beneath the teasing tone. "Not even a little bit." Mason set down the brush and turned to face her. "You, terrified," Hannah admitted, "but not because I doubt my feelings for you. I am just scared of disappointing you. Of not being the wife you deserve." Mason crossed to her, taking both her hands in his. "Hannah, you could never disappoint me. You are everything I did not know I was looking for. I do not know how to be a ranch wife. I can barely cook. I have never tended animals. I know nothing about cattle or horses or any of this." She gestured helplessly at their surroundings. "You will learn, and I do not need you to be anything other than who you are." He pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers. "Besides, I happen to know you are an excellent seamstress and you can read better than anyone I have ever met. Those are valuable skills too. Reading will not help birth a calf or mend a fence. No, but it will help teach our children someday. It will bring culture and education to this rough place. You have so much to offer, Hannah. Do not sell yourself short." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and Mason felt the last of his own doubts dissolve. They would figure things out together, learn together, build a life that incorporated both their strengths and compensated for their weaknesses. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the October weather perfect for a celebration. The small church was packed with townspeople, many of whom Mason barely knew, all curious to witness the marriage of the cowboy and the Eastern lady he had rescued. Mason stood at the front in his best suit, freshly pressed and only slightly uncomfortable, watching the doors for his first glimpse of Hannah. When she appeared on Frank Henderson's arm, Mason's breath caught in his throat. Martha and the church ladies had worked miracles with the blue dress, transforming it into something that could serve as a wedding gown. Hannah had pinned her dark hair up with flowers from Martha's garden, and she carried a simple bouquet of wildflowers that suited her far better than any hothouse roses could have. But it was her face that captured Mason's attention, the radiant joy in her expression as she walked down the aisle toward him. This was real. This was happening. In a matter of minutes, this incredible woman would be his wife. The ceremony passed in a blur of traditional words and promises. Mason repeated his vows with complete sincerity, meaning every word about loving and cherishing Hannah for the rest of his days. When Reverend Phillips finally pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss Mason gave his new bride was chaste enough for the church setting but held the promise of deeper passion to come. The reception was held at the Hendersons' Mercantile, with tables of food and punch set up in the large open space usually reserved for inventory. Someone had brought a fiddle, and soon music filled the air as couples took turns dancing. Mason pulled Hannah into his arms for the first dance, holding her close as they swayed to the cheerful tune. "Happy," he murmured against her ear, deliriously. Hannah pulled back enough to look up at him, her eyes sparkling. "Is this real? Sometimes I cannot believe it is actually happening." "It is real. You are mine and I am yours, and everything else is just details we will figure out as we go." They danced until Hannah's face was flushed and she was laughing with pure joy, and Mason thought he had never seen anything more beautiful. When they finally took a break to catch their breath and sample some of the food, they were immediately surrounded by well-wishers offering congratulations and advice. Doc Whitfield clapped Mason on the shoulder. "You did good, son. Real good. Thank you for everything, Doc. We could not have done this without you. Just doing my job, though I will admit this turned out better than I expected when I first examined that sick girl in your bedroom." The doctor winked. Sometimes the universe knows what it is doing. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Mason found himself repeatedly grateful for the community that had supported them through this whirlwind courtship and wedding. Martha, who had fed them and championed them and made sure everything was proper. Doc Whitfield, who had cared for Hannah and given his blessing to their union. Frank and the other merchants who had contributed food and supplies to the celebration. Even Abigail, who had served as chaperone with stern dedication and was now dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief during the dancing. When the sun began to set, Mason and Hannah made their exit amid a shower of rice and good wishes. They rode back to the ranch in the wagon Mason had borrowed for the occasion, Hannah nestled against his side, both of them grinning like fools. "Welcome home, Mrs. Parker," Mason said as he lifted her down from the wagon seat. "Home," Hannah repeated, testing the word. "It sounds perfect." He carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests, setting her down gently in the main room that was now truly theirs. Someone, probably Martha, had tidied up and left a covered plate of wedding cake on the table along with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "She thinks of everything," Hannah said, moving to uncover the cake. Mason came up behind her, his hand settling on her waist, his lips finding the curve of her neck. "There is plenty of time for cake later." Hannah turned in his arms, her expression suddenly serious. "Mason, I should tell you. I do not really know what to expect. My mother died before she could explain the particulars of marriage, and I never had anyone else to ask. We will figure it out together," Mason assured her, touched by her vulnerability. "And Hannah, there is no rush. We have the rest of our lives." "I know. But I want this. I want you." She rose on her toes to kiss him, and this time there was no audience to concern themselves with, no need for restraint. Mason swept her into his arms and carried her to the bedroom, their bedroom now, where he proceeded to show his bride exactly how much he loved and cherished her. Their union was tender and passionate by turns, fumbling in the way of first times but sweetened by genuine affection and trust. When they finally lay tangled together in the afterglow, Hannah's head on Mason's chest and his fingers trailing through her loose hair, both felt a profound sense of completeness. "I love you," Hannah whispered into the darkness. "I love you too." Mason pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "More than I ever thought possible." They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, and Mason's last thought before sleep claimed him was that he had never been happier or more grateful for the random chance that had brought Hannah into his life. The weeks that followed were an adjustment for both of them. Hannah threw herself into learning the skills she would need as a ranch wife, and though she had been honest about her lack of experience, she proved to be a quick study. Martha became a frequent visitor, teaching Hannah everything from churning butter to tending the vegetable garden that had been largely neglected during Mason's bachelor years. Hannah, in turn, brought her own gifts to the ranch. She organized Mason's chaotic collection of papers and receipts, creating a proper bookkeeping system that let him track his expenses and profits with unprecedented clarity. She mended his clothes with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. And she transformed the house from a functional living space into a real home, adding small touches like curtains in the windows and wildflowers on the table that made coming back from a long day of work feel like a privilege rather than just a necessity. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, and Hannah would read aloud from books she ordered from a catalog. Mason found himself developing a taste for literature he had never bothered with before, drawn in by the music of Hannah's voice and the way she brought the stories to life. Their physical relationship deepened as well, as they learned each other's bodies and preferences. Mason discovered that Hannah was passionate beneath her reserved exterior, responding to his touch with an enthusiasm that never failed to thrill him. And Hannah learned that her cowboy husband could be surprisingly tender, always making sure she found pleasure before seeking his own. 3 months after their wedding, on a cold January morning, Hannah woke Mason with the news he had been half expecting and wholly hoping for. "I am pregnant," she said, her face glowing with joy and nerves in equal measure. "I am almost certain." Mason pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she laughed and protested that he would squeeze the baby out. "We are having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Hannah, we are having a baby." Doc Whitfield confirmed the pregnancy the next day, estimating that Hannah would give birth in early September. The news spread through Tombstone with the usual speed, and suddenly Mason found himself receiving congratulations and unwanted advice everywhere he went. Hannah bloomed with pregnancy, her happiness evident in every aspect of her life. Mason found himself constantly amazed by the changes in her body, the visible proof of the life they had created together. He became protective to the point of hovering, until Hannah finally sat him down and gently but firmly explained that she was pregnant, not made of glass. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time," she reminded him. "I will be fine. I know, I just worry." "That is because you love me." Hannah took his hand and placed it on her swelling belly. "And I love you for it, but you have to trust me to know my own limits." Mason did his best to honor that, though it was not always easy. He found himself lying awake at night sometimes, listening to Hannah's breathing and thinking about all the ways childbirth could go wrong. His mother had survived 2 births, only to be taken by fever later. He had seen women in Texas die in childbirth, had watched strong men broken by the loss of wives and babies, but he kept his fears to himself for the most part, not wanting to burden Hannah with his anxiety. Instead, he channeled his nervous energy into preparing for the baby's arrival. He built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. He expanded the garden to ensure they would have plenty of preserved vegetables for the winter. He even added that parlor he had mentioned, working on it in every spare moment until Hannah had a proper sitting room with windows that let in the afternoon light. Summer came with its brutal heat, and Hannah grew heavy and uncomfortable. Mason did what he could to help, bringing her cool water and fanning her while she rested, taking over more of the household chores so she could conserve her energy. They had hired a young Mexican woman named Rosa to help around the house and with the baby when it came, and her cheerful presence was a blessing to them both. On a sweltering night in early September, Hannah woke Mason with a gasp and a grip on his arm that would leave bruises. "It is time," she said through gritted teeth. "The baby is coming." Mason had thought he was prepared. He had sent Rosa to fetch Doc Whitfield and Martha weeks ago in anticipation of this moment. He had clean linens ready, water boiling on the stove, everything the doctor had told him to have on hand. But nothing could have prepared him for the reality of seeing Hannah in pain, of being helpless to do anything but hold her hand and whisper encouragement while her body labored to bring their child into the world. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Doc Whitfield arrived and took over with calm competence, examining Hannah and declaring everything to be progressing normally. Martha bustled around making Hannah comfortable and shooing Mason out of the room whenever he got too much in the way. But Hannah would not let him leave entirely, gripping his hand during each contraction with a strength that belied her delicate appearance. "You are doing so well," Mason told her, wiping the sweat from her face with a cool cloth. "So strong, so brave." "I do not feel brave," Hannah panted between contractions. "I feel like I am being torn apart." "Not much longer now," Doc Whitfield said from his position at the foot of the bed. "I can see the head. On the next contraction, I need you to push with everything you have got." What followed was the most intense experience of Mason's life. Hannah bore down with a guttural cry that seemed to come from the depths of her soul, her face contorted with effort. Doc Whitfield's hands moved with practiced skill, guiding the baby free, and suddenly the room was filled with the lusty wail of a newborn. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, holding up the squirming, red-faced infant. "A healthy boy." Mason felt tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son, at the miracle that he and Hannah had created. Doc Whitfield quickly cut the cord and cleaned the baby, then wrapped him in a soft blanket and placed him in Hannah's arms. "Hello, little one," Hannah whispered, her own face wet with tears. "We have been waiting for you." The baby quieted at the sound of her voice, his unfocused eyes seeming to search for her face. Mason leaned in close, one arm around Hannah, the other hand gently touching the downy dark hair on his son's head. "He is perfect," Mason breathed. "Absolutely perfect." "Have you decided on a name?" Martha asked from where she was tidying up. Mason and Hannah had discussed names for months, debating the merits of various family names and their own preferences. But now, looking at his son's face, Mason knew exactly what felt right. "Matthew," he said. "Matthew James Parker." "After your father and mine," Hannah said softly, looking up at him with love shining in her tired eyes. "If that is all right with you." "It is perfect." She kissed their son's forehead gently. "Welcome to the world, Matthew James. You are so loved." Doc Whitfield finished his examination of both mother and baby, declaring them healthy and strong. "You did well, Hannah, real well, but you need rest now. The next few days are crucial for recovery." "I will make sure she rests," Mason promised, "whatever she needs." After the doctor and Martha left, Rosa staying to help with any immediate needs, Mason sat beside the bed watching Hannah nurse their son for the first time. The sight of his wife cradling their child, the tender way she touched Matthew's tiny fingers and counted his toes, filled him with an emotion so powerful it was almost painful. "I was so scared," Hannah admitted quietly. "Not just of the pain, but that something would go wrong. That I would lose him or he would lose me. But you did not. You both came through perfectly." Mason leaned down to kiss her forehead. "You are the strongest person I know, Hannah Parker." "I had motivation." She smiled at him, that radiant expression he loved so much. I had to survive so I could spend the rest of my life with you." The weeks after Matthew's birth were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. The baby had a powerful set of lungs and used them frequently, especially during the night. Mason and Hannah took turns walking him, rocking him, singing to him until he finally settled back to sleep. Rosa was invaluable during the day, handling the housework and cooking while Hannah focused on recovering and caring for Matthew. Mason found himself utterly besotted with his son. He would stand over the cradle for long minutes just watching Matthew sleep, marveling at the tiny perfection of him. He learned to change diapers and warm bottles of expressed milk so Hannah could get extra rest. And he discovered that he had a talent for soothing the baby, his deep voice and steady presence seeming to calm Matthew even during his fussiest moments. As autumn turned to winter and then to spring, Matthew grew and thrived. He smiled at 6 weeks, laughed at 3 months, and was sitting up on his own by 6 months. Each milestone was celebrated like a major achievement, and Mason took almost obnoxious pride in documenting his son's progress. "He is going to be tall like you," Hannah observed one evening as they played with Matthew on a blanket on the floor. At 9 months, he was already trying to pull himself up on the furniture, determined to be mobile. "And smart like his mother," Mason added, watching his son figure out how to stack wooden blocks. "The perfect combination." "You are biased, completely," Mason grinned at her, "but also correct." Life on the ranch continued its steady rhythm. Mason expanded his herd with the profits from the previous year, and Hannah proved to have a good head for the business side of ranching. She maintained meticulous records and helped Mason negotiate better prices for his cattle by doing research and reaching out to buyers in different markets. On their 2nd anniversary, Mason surprised Hannah with a piano he had ordered from San Francisco and had shipped at considerable expense to Tombstone. It took 6 men to get it into the parlor, and the look on Hannah's face when she saw it made every penny worthwhile. "Mason, this is too much," she protested, even as her fingers itched toward the keys. "Play something," he urged, lifting Matthew onto his hip so Hannah could sit at the bench. Her fingers found the keys with the ease of long practice, and soon music filled the house. Matthew clapped his hands in delight at the sounds, and Mason felt a wave of contentment wash over him. This was everything he had never known he wanted. A wife he loved, a son who was the light of his life, a home filled with music and laughter and love. That winter brought challenges in the form of a hard freeze that killed some of his cattle and damaged his winter feed stores. Money was tight for a while, and Mason worried about being able to provide for his growing family. But Hannah never complained, never made him feel inadequate. Instead, she helped him develop a plan to recover the losses, selling some of her jewelry from her Philadelphia days to help bridge the gap until spring. "You do not have to do that," Mason protested when she showed him the pieces she intended to sell. "They are just things," Hannah said firmly. "Remnants of a life I do not want anymore. I would much rather use them to protect the life we have built together." Her faith in him, in their future, gave Mason the strength to keep pushing forward. By spring, they had recovered from the winter losses and were back on solid footing. And that summer brought more good news when Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. "Are you happy?" she asked, searching his face for his reaction. "Ecstatic," Mason assured her, pulling her into a careful embrace. "Matthew is going to be a big brother." This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Hannah knew what to expect. She remained active and healthy throughout, chasing after Matthew, who was now a rambunctious toddler with boundless energy. Mason did his best to help, but running a ranch kept him busy from dawn to dusk most days. Their daughter was born in March, arriving in the early morning hours with far less drama than her brother. She had Hannah's delicate features and Mason's dark hair, and they named her Margaret Rose, calling her Maggie for short. Matthew was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding time. Mason watched his son's gentle interactions with Maggie and felt pride swell in his chest. They were raising good children, he and Hannah. Children who would know love and security and the value of hard work. As the years passed, the Parker family continued to grow and thrive. Mason expanded the ranch further, building a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. Hannah started a small school in Tombstone, teaching the children of miners and ranchers and merchants, fulfilling the dream that had originally brought her west. They added 2 more children to their family, another boy named Samuel, and a second daughter they called Elizabeth. Through it all, Mason and Hannah's love only deepened. They had their disagreements, of course, the inevitable friction of 2 strong-willed people building a life together. But they had learned to talk through their problems, to listen to each other and find compromises that honored both their needs. On their 10th anniversary, Mason took Hannah on a trip to San Francisco, leaving the children with Martha and Frank. It was the first time they had been alone together for more than a few hours since Matthew's birth, and they savored the freedom to focus entirely on each other. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" Hannah asked as they sat in a restaurant overlooking the bay, the lights of the city sparkling around them. "Some days it feels like yesterday that I carried you into my house, not knowing if you would survive the night." Mason reached across the table to take her hand. "Other days I cannot remember what life was like before you. I was so lost back then, so scared and alone." Hannah squeezed his fingers. "You saved my life, Mason, not just by getting me to a doctor, but by giving me a reason to want to live. You saved mine too. I did not even know, I was just going through the motions, until you showed me what it meant to really live." They returned to Tombstone refreshed and even more committed to each other and to the life they had built. Mason continued to be successful with the ranch, eventually becoming one of the most respected cattlemen in the territory. Hannah's school grew to include over 30 students, and she gained a reputation as an excellent teacher who could reach even the most difficult children. Matthew grew into a tall, serious young man with his father's work ethic and his mother's love of learning. He attended college in California, but returned to Arizona to help run the ranch, eventually marrying a sweet-natured girl from Tucson and giving Mason and Hannah their first grandchildren. Maggie proved to have her mother's intelligence and her father's stubbornness, becoming a teacher like Hannah and fighting for educational reforms in the territory. Samuel followed his passion for law, becoming an attorney and eventually a territorial judge. And Elizabeth, their youngest, married a doctor and moved to Phoenix, where she helped establish a hospital for women and children. Through all the changes and challenges, the triumphs and occasional tragedies, Mason and Hannah remained each other's constant. They grew old together, their hair turning gray and their bodies showing the wear of hard-lived lives, but their love never diminished. On a warm October evening many years after that fateful day in Tombstone, Mason and Hannah sat together on the porch of their ranch house, now substantially expanded to accommodate their large family when they visited. Matthew was running the day-to-day operations of the ranch now, but Mason still liked to keep his hand in, checking on the cattle and offering advice when asked. "You ever regret it?" Mason asked, his arm around Hannah's shoulders as they watched the sunset paint the desert in familiar shades of crimson and gold. "Staying here instead of going to Tucson, giving up the life you had planned." Hannah leaned into him, fitting against his side with the ease of decades of practice. Not for a single moment. That was never my life, Mason. This is. You are, our children, our grandchildren, this place we built together. This is where I was always meant to be. Even when money was tight, even during the hard years, especially during the hard years. Those are the times that proved we could weather anything as long as we faced it together. She tilted her head to look up at him, and in her eyes, he still saw the young woman who had collapsed outside the stage office all those years ago. I love you, Mason Parker. I have loved you since the moment I woke up in your bed and saw you sitting there watching over me. I love you too, Hannah, more with every passing year. He kissed her, soft and sweet, a promise renewed with every touch. They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their family, Matthew and his wife getting their children ready for bed, the cheerful chatter of multiple generations gathered under one roof. Mason thought about the unlikely chain of events that had brought them to this moment. If Hannah had not gotten sick, if the stage had left 5 minutes earlier, if he had been anywhere else that afternoon, their paths might never have crossed. But somehow, against all odds, they had found each other in the vastness of the Arizona territory. "What are you thinking about?" Hannah asked, always able to sense when his mind wandered. "About fate, about chance, about how lucky I am that you happened to collapse in front of me that day." Hannah laughed, the sound as beautiful to him now as it had been when he first heard it. "Only you would describe my illness as lucky. You know what I mean. If things had been even slightly different, I might never have met you, never known what it was like to love you and be loved by you, never had our children or built this life. But things were not different. We found each other exactly when we needed to. You were there to catch me when I fell, and I like to think I was there to help you build something more than just a ranch." She nestled closer against him. "We were meant for each other, Mason. I have always believed that. So have I." He tightened his arm around her, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his side. "So have I." As the night deepened and the desert cooled, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms and the blanket of memories they had woven together over the decades. The story that had begun with a desperate woman collapsing in the dust, and a cowboy who could not walk away, had transformed into something beautiful and enduring. A love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for the trials it had faced. Inside the house, Matthew was telling his own children about how their grandparents had met, embellishing the story with dramatic flair that made Hannah laugh when she heard it through the open window. The legend had grown over the years, becoming part of the family mythology, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected moments. Mason thought about all the years still ahead of them, the quiet mornings and peaceful evenings, the continued joy of watching their family grow and flourish. He thought about growing even older with Hannah by his side, of eventually leaving the ranch entirely in Matthew's capable hands, and spending their final years simply enjoying each other's company. But mostly, he focused on the present moment, on the warmth of Hannah's body against his, the sound of her breathing, the perfect rightness of having her here beside him. After all these years, she still had the power to make his heart race with a single smile, still filled him with gratitude and wonder that she had chosen him. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what? For collapsing in front of me that day. For trusting me to help you. For saying yes when I asked you to marry me. For giving me a life more wonderful than anything I could have imagined." He kissed the top of her head. "For everything." Hannah turned in his arms, her hands coming up to frame his face, her eyes shining with tears and joy. "Thank you for being there to catch me, for taking care of me when I had nothing and no one. for seeing me as more than just a problem to be solved, for loving me the way I had always dreamed of being loved. They kissed again, and in that kiss was everything they had shared and everything they still had to look forward to. The struggles and triumphs, the ordinary moments and the extraordinary ones, all woven together into a tapestry of a life well lived and a love that had stood the test of time. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and the desert night embraced the ranch with its quiet peace. Inside the house, their family slept safely, the next generation already beginning to write their own stories. And on the porch, two people who had found each other against all odds sat wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for every moment they had been given and every moment still to come. Mason and Hannah Parker had built more than just a successful ranch in the Arizona territory. They had built a legacy of love, of family, of two people who had taken a chance on each other and created something beautiful. And as they sat together under the desert stars, neither would have changed a single thing about the journey that had brought them to this perfect moment of peace and contentment. Their story had begun with a woman collapsing before the stage left town and a cowboy who carried her to his home and called the doctor. But it had become so much more than that simple beginning. It had become a testament to the power of love to heal and transform, to the strength that comes from partnership, and to the beautiful truth that sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never planned for. As the night deepened and the desert settled into its nocturnal rhythms, Mason and Hannah finally rose from their chairs and headed inside, hand in hand as they had been for decades. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, but they would face it together, as they always had. And that, more than anything else, was the true happy ending to their story. Not a single moment of triumph, but rather the steady, enduring love that had carried them through every season of their lives together, and would continue to do so until their final days.